All right. All right, so thanks everyone for coming out to yet another Live Free and Debate series debate. That's a little redundant. Tonight's debate, the resolution as stated is, as an implementation strategy, social welfare and spending programs such as SNAP, Social Security, and TAANF and Medicaid should be ended within 100 days rather than over years. Arguing in the affirmative, we have Scott Forte. Is that private? Scott is a pilot, real estate developer, entrepreneur, and freedom enthusiast. Arguing the negative, we have DS Dexter Tarbox Jr. He's an advertising and marketing specialist based on the Seacoast of New Hampshire. And without further ado, let's begin the debate.
All right, guys. I'm Scott. We'll be arguing for ending within 100 days. I have some notes down here, so while I'm looking down, you guys know why. All right, so we can all pretty much agree that spending is a very big issue. The amount of welfare that we see today is not what the founders of this country wanted. We have just about, for total spending, 50% of GDP is what we're spending right now. We're $10 trillion last year, or this year, 2021. 10 trillion out of the 20 for GDP. That's 50% of GDP. That's crazy. We need to take this all down. You guys all agree. I think me and Dexter even agree. It's just how are we going to do this? And what I'm saying is, if it's not 100 days, it's probably going to fail. And we're going to tell you why. So what's the point for taking welfare out of the government's greasy little hands? Big things are, we want to make a more connected community, right? We want to have people not depend so much on the government, but depend on each other. So we know in this room, can we have a show of hands, how many people know someone that's abused or is abusing or has abused a government program? Every single person. I don't think there's a human being on earth that can say that they don't know someone that said, oh yeah, I got free money over here. Yeah, everybody knows someone that's taken free money. Because how do you not take free money? That's how people think about it. Oh, it's free money. Why wouldn't I take it? And that is one of the core issues here. It disconnects the communities. And one of the big things is it decreases our drive and our innovation when we have these handouts and when we're not forced to do things. We're not forced to go to our friends, our family, our community, our church, whoever, to get the support that we need, to go look for jobs, even though we might not want them. So we're not forced to do things, so that decreases that drive, decreases that ambition. And while that may sound like a general, hey, we should lose welfare altogether, it's going to be very important that we do it in less than 100 days, because if we do it in more than 100 days, as you'll see, we're probably just going to go back to where we started. We all know it's not the government's job to dole out money to say, hey, you look like you're in need. Here's free food. Here's free health care. Here's, you name it, here's free everything for you. That's not what the government was ever designed to do. The government was designed to do one thing, protect our freedom. It's doing a lot more than that now, but that's a debate for another day. So income security is what we're talking about today. Income security on the government's budget is about $570 billion. What they hide from that income security is the Medicaid. Medicaid itself is $640 billion, bringing us a total to just under $1.2 trillion, which was only 8 to 10% of the budget, but after 2019 and 2020, we're up to 20% of our total budget. Hopefully that will go away in 2019 and 2020 were crazy years. So what we're going to talk about is mostly the 2019 budget. So 100 days or less. I'm guessing Dexter's going to say these are some of the reasons why it won't work. First one, everyone's probably thinking, if we shut everything off in 100 days, everyone's going to die. There's going to be a problem. There's going to be panic. Children are going to go without eating. It's going to be a problem. That's not true. That is a very rational thing to think. In the beginning, you're saying, what about all the people on these programs? What's going to happen to them? And it's good to have concern for people, but having that concern doesn't justify those programs. 100 days, it's not enough time to transition. No one would be able to do anything 100 days. Well, that's also, a well-meaning thought, because you want these people to be provided for, but I'm going to show you 100 days is going to be perfectly fine. It's unrealistic. Scott, you're never going to be able to do it in 100 days. There's no way that you can end every single program in 100 days and get all these people the support that they need. I can. And if we go over that 100 days, it's most likely going to be overruled or overturned, and we're going to be back to the start. But Scott, there's going to be riots, there's going to be civil unrest, there's going to be people burning down buildings. Well, again, if we go over that 100-day mark, I'll show you why that may be a problem. But under 100 days, I'm going to force people to focus. And that forced focus is going to make this implementation successful. As we said just a moment ago, a couple of the reasons why we think 100 days won't work. It's going to be overturned. Imagine the social media pressure on day one, right? I say, hey, we passed it, all welfare is going away. Imagine what kind of things CNN, MSNBC, imagine ABC, all of them, imagine what they would be saying. They'd be like, look at all these kids coming out of the school, they're losing 10 pounds a day, everyone's going to die. All these people that can't afford any of their medicine, they're going into these clinics and they're coming out with $1 million bills that they can't pay for. All of that is going to be pressure on these politicians to say, hey, maybe we need to rethink this 100-day implementation program. Maybe we need to push it to a year. Maybe we need to push it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But all of this pressure that they're going to be feeling is going to have them push and kick the can and kick the can and kick the can. And we don't want that. We want to stick to 100 days. And it's not just going to be the media. There's going to be pressure from our peers. Social media pressure. You guys remember with all I forget what their term was this summer, the riots of all the summer. I forget what they called them, the summer of love. Is that what they called it? They were riots. They were burning things down. It was not a pleasant time over the summer.
Peaceful protesters.
Yeah, peaceful protesters. You're going to see a lot of social pressure. You're going to see people change their Instagram profile pages. Maybe it's just not, black out your screen, because that really wouldn't make sense for this implementation, although people could argue that. It's racist. It's going to affect people that are in minority positions more than it would for, white people. Okay, well, we'll put the statistics aside for a second. It's not racist. We're talking strictly about saving the American taxpayer dollars and making sure that people in need are getting what they want within the time frame they actually need it, and getting less people to abuse the system. We're going to see a lot of corporate pressure. Corporate people are going to start pressuring these politicians. There's a lot of money that's funneled in that $1.2 trillion to companies, and they're not going to be very happy that that divvy pool that the government's paying out is going away. So there's going to be a lot of corporate pressure. Over that 100-day mark, we're going to also see a lot of that scientific pressure, right? People are going to come up with studies that say, okay, well, this is what we're seeing. We're projecting now. This peer-reviewed journal says if we eliminate everything within 100 days, we're going to see X amount of kids die. We're going to see this many more cases of polio, this many more cases of COVID. They're going to try anything they can to prove scientifically that it's going to be a detriment to society, and that's not what we want. And the biggest problem of all is there's going to be a big centralization of power. If you go over 100 days, you're going to see, even if the system gets implemented, if it gets implemented, it's going to be centralized in big entities that are national, and that's not what we want. We want decentralization. A mirror system of taking the public system right now and turning it into a privately run system, that would not work. We want to decentralize this system, and doing it in over 100 days would allow them to make that happen. So what is 100 days or less? That's the Goldilocks zone. It's perfect. It has been done before. People have raised millions of dollars, billions of dollars in a very short period of time. It's realistic. Starting companies, funding the companies, employing the companies is all going to be possible. And one of the biggest things that we have in our benefit is, you guys have all been to a public school, right? You guys have projects and work. If you have a deadline, you have a project that's, let's call it 100 days out. When do you really start working on that project? I can say for me, in flight training, we do what's called a CFI notebook, a flight instructor notebook. You have all semester to write it. You know when everyone writes it? Last 3 weeks. Last 3 weeks, everyone writes everything in your CFI notebook. 100, 200 pages, all done right there. All the best work comes at the end, when people have pressure on them. We want that pressure to make the best solutions possible. And within 100 days is the right amount of pressure to make innovation happen. And as we discussed a little bit ago, that decentralization. If we have centralized versions of the same system now, they're not going to work. We need decentralized systems. We need Portsmouth. We need Dover. We need smaller groups to say, I'm going to take care of my community. My community is going to take care of itself. And maybe there's a whole community that can't take care of itself. Maybe, I don't know this, I'm not saying it's true, maybe Rochester cannot support itself. But maybe Rochester can reach out to Portsmouth and say, hey, you guys have a little bit more of an affluent community. Maybe you guys can help with Rochester. That may be an option too. We want efficiency, we want innovation, and we want reduced overhead. How do we get the reduced overhead? It has to be decentralized. It has to be in smaller locations. You have to know the people that are actually in the systems, and we have to want to reach out to these people. We don't want the abuse, and we want to make sure that people are targeted and their needs are fulfilled. So our solution looks like this. Companies bring in $30 trillion a year. Individuals, $21 trillion. Gross numbers. Together, that's $50 trillion. If you took all of the programs that we have right now and said, if you just said a gross number, how much would corporations and individuals need to donate to cover these costs? The answer is 2.3%. That's it. 2.3% of your money could cover every single thing that we're eliminating, all 1.8 trillion or 1.18 trillion. Companies alone, if individuals didn't donate, would be somewhere around 4%, and if US citizens donated by themselves, it would only be 5.5%. Personally, I try to donate around 10% a year of the gross revenue that I make. I feel like that's what we all should do, is try to make this whole world, our community, a better place. And if we can do it in 2.3%, I think we should. So it's going to happen in 4 stages. It's going to be 30 days of bitching, 30 days of innovation, 10 days of getting funding, and 10 days of onboarding. The bitching we've already talked about. We know what the media is going to do. We know what companies are going to do. We know what's going to happen. We know that no one's going to do anything for the first 30 days, just like that school project syndrome. We may have some unrest, but hopefully with that 30 days, we could get people to stop complaining and start acting. We need to partner with philanthropists. The guys that have givingpledge.org, who's heard of that before? It's where billionaires pledge to give away all their money. They have 231 billionaires that pledge to give away all their money already. Bill Gates, Buffett, Zuckerberg, Branson, they're already part of this system. The billionaires are already on board. So we don't have to worry about them. We have their buy-in. The guy that started 5 Hour Energy, he has $4 billion. He's giving away 99% of his money, and he's doing amazing things with water, food, and energy. And he's doing it all by himself, and he's making India better by himself. And if with innovation, that's possible. He had a great quote that said, it's time to, if you have wealth, it's your duty to help those less privileged with what is that we can do? Well, what is that we can do that will make an enormous difference? The answer is invent stuff. That's the best thing that we can do. We can invent things. Innovation is going to solve all of our problems. Which leads us to step Stage 2, innovation. We have 30 days to innovate. People are going to start companies. People are going to form ideas, they're going to launch companies, and they're going to start hiring and training employees. Stage 3 only needs 10 days, funding. Can they raise all the money that they need within that 10 days? The answer is yes. If you look at when we pulled out of Afghanistan, Glenn Beck was able to raise $30 million in 3 days. 3 days to fly people out of Afghanistan. Barstool Sports, in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, they said they came up with $41 million to local bars and organizations to give them the support that they needed. GoFundMe raised $625 million for COVID relief. Haiti earthquake, $500 million. GoFundMe has everything, from America's Food Fund from $44 million to BLM last year at $14.7 million. People have money and people are donating. The aggregators are going to prevail. And that last stage, stage 4, is going to be onboarding. There's going to have 30 days to implement all of these programs. People are going to be on one program, they're going to have to sign up for a new one. The people that are abusing the programs are going to be found out, they're not going to get it in anymore. Then we'll have a good program with good people and running in that innovative way. But that's not the only way. If we do eliminate it at the Fed level, the alternative, which I don't like, you could just run it at the state level. Each state could choose to do their own things. And the good thing about that is there's going to be increased competition between the states. With that, I'll end my segment and hand it over to Dexter.
You get an extra 20 seconds, Dexter.
I don't think it'll be necessary, but glad to know I have it available. Well, good evening, and thank you for having me tonight. So as you know, or some of you know, this is my first appearance in this forum, and I promise I will not take any more time than I need to expound on this argument. So being new, in preparation for tonight's debate, I had to provide a brief biography. And when I finally located my previous bio, I had to debate keeping the reference to the term that I served on the City of Dover Planning Board. It's been a while. But in the end, I decided to keep it because it caused me to recollect a relevant little anecdote, which, if you'll allow me, I'll share. Although I can't remember the precise details, there was an occasion when I was on the board at which I voiced my support for a certain regulation which invoked the ire of one especially vocal pair who attended almost every meeting. And that evening they followed me out of the building and they denounced me for a fascist of the worst kind in all sorts of colorful language. It was a lot of fun. But then 2 weeks later, at the occurrence of our next meeting, I had the chance to call to task some representatives from the power company over a private property issue. And on that night, I was similarly followed out by that same couple. And I'm bracing myself for what's about to happen. But this time, they shook my hand and they loaded me with praise for having taken such a position against the power company. And they were, of course, a pair of devout libertarians. But that is, to me, the flexibility which underlines the defining trait of libertarianism, in that it follows the path of neither party, but only that of its own unyielding commitment to personal liberty. So despite my disagreement with the libertarian position in this motion, I feel it's important to say, that I can still scarcely imagine that there is now a group that is more vocally working towards the downfall of our unwished-for nanny in the federal government than is the libertarian movement. But let's confine ourselves now to the question that we have at hand. Now, Mr. Forte has argued well the points on which we are all likely in agreement. Namely, that the system of social welfare spending is wrong, it is unwieldy, and that it ought to be radically reformed and mostly dismantled. Indeed, the resolution presupposes that this is politically possible, i.e. that the House, the Senate, and the Executive are all duly elected and are all of one mind to enact this policy with such immediate effect as the 100-day timeline provides. Now, this is a tempting proposition. It's bold, it feels good, it's indeed a step in the right direction, but it is absolutely infeasible. You cannot so quickly deprive such a large population of that same rich milk on which they've glutted themselves for so many years, without sparking such an uproar as would threaten the stability of civil society? Look no further than the rampant destruction, which is steadily increasing in outrageousness on the West Coast and in the Midwest, to see what even misplaced annoyance can encourage. To assume that adopting the resolution is undangerous would be a mistake. In fact, it even nationalizes many of those dangers which are now otherwise local, by unnecessarily providing a rallying cry for angry and disenfranchised people from coast to coast. Remember that many of the debates which were prologue to the American Civil War were earlier had in Congress on purely economic grounds. Money, or the government's getting and giving thereof, has a great power to inspire people towards radical and even destructive action. The history of the world bears this fact out time and time again. Now, should you wish to test Mr. Forte's level of concern for this threat, because I do contend it is there, you need pursue the issue no further than to question the resolution. Why does he limit the reach of his welfare termination agenda to those programs which he's presented here, except but for the fact that he realizes, A, there is an appreciable need for certain social programs, which need survives the libertarian scrutiny under the affirmative resolution, that is, Medicare and Social Security, which are carved out from this resolution. And maybe we can understand that, given the grave circumstances under which the indigent elderly and the disabled endured their later years prior to its enactment. And of course, there's also a misbegotten notion that perhaps people have paid into these programs and so they're considered different. But B, he also must realize that a rapid and complete termination of social welfare programs could never be accepted by the people, and would indeed likely result in the dangers which I've mentioned. The opposing side, in limiting the extent to which he would rescind social welfare, tacitly admits that we cannot condemn all social welfare right away. And even if we have the ready mandate to massively reduce it, I submit that it cannot all be expunged within 100 days because it would be judged totally unacceptable by a sufficiently great number of people capable of forcefully rejecting the initiative. I understand then why Mr. Forte may feel confident in proposing the withdrawal of the select programs included in this resolution, for example, SNAP, temporary assistance to needy families, etc., and not others. It's because it limits the risk of a violent backlash. We'll take back some, but not all. It's politic. But I do fail to see why he anticipates it will adequately do so, adequately mitigate that risk. Are these programs so meek that he expects backlash from their 100-day downfall not to disrupt society, but when Medicare and SSI happened, that would? There are nearly 40 million people who were recipients of SNAP in 2019, and one can only imagine what multiple of primarily leftist supporters would be ready to resist Mr. Forte's action if it were to be implemented. 100 days is bold, but it is also bait. It is bait for outrage, and it is a primer for sloppy policy implementation. Much to many of our shared displeasures, and their numbers are even more difficult to identify from government reports than those of the recipients, but there still are now busily working tens of thousands of employees of the federal welfare programs. Now, I endeavored to calculate the number. I'll admit I was totally confounded. The government is not forthcoming with enough granular information to calculate what number of people are involved in providing or administering these welfare programs. But tens of thousands we can surmise at least from the numbers, at least. Now, under this resolution, a great many of them are now to be turned out. Consider, why should even a moiety of them remain to efficiently implement the policy and sunset their operations when the resolution calls for all of their efforts to be resigned to nothing within 100 days? What sane, ambitious person would engage in such a suicide mission? I therefore suspect that you shall not even have the manpower to effectively wind down the welfare programs over 100 days if this policy were enacted. How can we ever hope to achieve the much-needed reversion of social welfare to the exclusive aid of those in dire want, if we capriciously reduce all programs to a 100-day target which only serves to incite? Here we would simultaneously eradicate our moral prestige among both ourselves and the like-minded nations of the world without compensating for the consequent massive deleterious effect on the expectations of those great many people who are currently the blameless recipients of welfare programs. If we are to avoid the gross negative civil consequences of our eliminating these programs, then we must present a coherent reasoning and a structure for what ought to remain. Why does Mr. Forte's proposal require the speed of 100 days instead of a transition period? Not to wax poetic, but the blamelessly poor and disabled do indeed exist. Does the resolution call for them to be starved into destruction if they fail to adequately prepare in the arbitrarily brief period of time provided? After all, 41% of welfare recipients are children, and 53% are seriously disabled. Why can it not be more calmly implemented in such a way that American families are made ready to accept it? Not over the course of 100 days, but in a reasonable enough period of time that they can take account of their finances and prepare for the new burden which they shall then have to shoulder. Any policy which tacitly assumes the necessity of major life changes for millions of people without providing adequate time for an appropriate response disadvantages those great many families and Americans who shall need to prepare for it, and risks the even more destructive response to which I have alluded to previously. Yes, let us bring down the social welfare system. But let us bring it down with an appropriate amount of time and consideration so as to make the transition reasonable, by more painlessly titrating our popular addiction to social spending. I contend that any rational person will consider a term of 100 days wholly insufficient for the purposes considered this evening. Thank you, Mr. Forte. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I'll first say that I could listen to Dexter talk all night. He has great narration voice.
Sold.
I will buy his Audible books. That said, I will not buy his argument. So, two things that I did not hear from the opposition. A plan to actually implement a program to get rid of all these welfare programs that will actually work. And two, I heard a whole bunch of, Democratic talking points to keep the same systems in place. And that is the last thing that we want. We want the programs removed. How do we do that successfully? How do we do that permanently? That's the big question that we need to ask. Because the question, hopefully for everyone in this room and everyone watching, isn't should we eliminate welfare? It's how do we do it and how do we do it successfully? I think any other plan that is not 100 days or less gives the opposition too much time to come up with a plan to keep the existing system or a mirror system that is just as inefficient. What we want is lower taxes. We want to stop paying into a system that is not run appropriately and that gives people the social safety net that they do not need, if we want to bring more people out of poverty, if we want to make people have a better quality of life, we need to force them to be uncomfortable. We need to force them to change. We need to force them to say, I'm going to look at my life right now. What am I doing? Am I applying for the jobs that I need to? Am I not taking these jobs because it's not exactly what I want? Am I just taking the free school lunch because it's free school lunch and I qualify and I don't have to go to the store and buy my kids food? Chances are that's true for a lot of America. Is it true for all 40 million of the people that we talked about? No. There are absolutely people that are in need. There are people that are suffering. There are disabled people. There are children. There are people that will suffer without these programs. And what I'm saying is it's not the government's job to do this. It's our job to do this. And the only way that we can do this, and we can do it effectively, is to make sure that we do it in a decentralized way, where our community is taking care of itself, where my taxpayer dollars aren't going to New York and DC and California and all the places that piss away my money. I don't want that. I want my money to stay in my city, to stay in my counties, to stay in my state. If I wanted to live in another state, I would move to another state. We need competition between the states. And how do we do that? We have a decentralized system that doesn't rely on the federal government. With more than 100 days, you're going to have national companies, the Googles and the Amazons of the nonprofit world, be built to say, this is an exact replacement of the government system. Just sign up here and we'll start taking your money and handing you checks. Having a nationalized system is going to give us the abuse that we already have. We want to eliminate the abuse. We want to increase innovation. We want to increase the drive of these individual people. We want to make our communities a better place. And the only way to do that is to force people to be uncomfortable. And the only way to do that is do it 100 days or less. With that, I yield my time.
Even when I was about 4 cells wide, I don't think anyone ever accused me of being a Democrat before. New for me. But I appreciate your compliments. Now, Mr. Forte says that he's concerned that if we go over 100 days in implementing his plan, then pressures will somehow overturn whatever may happen, or it could be overturned in some way. I don't know if he means in particular overturned by the Supreme Court or by judicial process, or overturned simply by virtue of the pressures that might be applied in the private sector, social media, etc.
All three.
All three. Okay. Well, I question why it wouldn't be overturned by the Supreme Court after 1,000 days, if that's what they're inclined to do. They don't work that fast. And I fail to see why that pressure is enough to cause the policy to fail. What I contend is that it will be more than pressure, the result of the proposal, if it is enacted. Mr. Forte talked about people blacking out their screens, in reference to some of the protests that were done on social media before. They're not going to black out their screens if this policy is enacted. They will burn down the house. These are not pressures. These are threats of violence, which are dangers facing us if this policy is enacted. Again, we need only to look to see how willingly people will go towards violence and destruction if they perceive a policy is deleterious to their interests and the interests of society. However much we may disagree with that position, we know that exists in the world, and it's not the threat of people doing a social media protest or companies boycotting or this or that. It is the threat of violence. We are talking here about inciting a revolution to save 5.6% of the federal budget.
8.9.
5.6. Well, we'll have to check our sources on that. Well, he analogizes this as well to homework. I don't think this is homework. This is the precipice of a potential civil war, not to mention the dangers which would be invoked by taking people out of the programs which are necessary for their lives. Again, I mentioned that over half of the people who are recipients of the welfare programs are seriously disabled. These are not freeloaders. These are people who cannot work in many cases. We cannot expect those people to be ready in 100 days. It cannot be done. And I understand that there's a concern for pressures, but those pressures will be there if this policy is enacted either way. It's not the same as homework, and it's not the same as a social media protest. With that, I think it's probably best if we go into questions.
Sure. First question for you, sir.
Sure.
If not 100 days, how many days?
Well, I mean, given the nature of arguing against a resolution, I don't know if it's necessarily incumbent on me to come up with an entire program, but I can speak generally about it. 100 days is just too short no matter what. I mean, that's less than a quarter, isn't it? But if we are to actually look, because we do agree that these programs need to be wound down, I think what we actually really need to do, firstly, is look at them on a program-by-program basis. And those deadlines should be adjusted based on the program. What's more, I think, even within that, looking at it as a recipient, by recipient basis. For example, children and those who are severely handicapped versus people who are currently working. 6 out of 10 recipients of Medicare are employed. So there are different people who have different levels of need, and I think that needs to be addressed as well. And it doesn't fit on such a neat timeline. And I think what overlays both of these 2 points, and what I referenced in my argument, is that this needs to be very effectively communicated to the people who it's going to impact. I don't even think in America today you could get out a strong enough messaging campaign to teach people how they're going to be transitioned off of these programs in 100 days. So I fail to see how it's reasonable to do it in this period. And again, I don't have a specific number, other than that I know it needs to be longer and it needs to be addressed more granularly than the proposal includes.
Do I follow up with that? As you guys just heard again, no plan. Without a plan, might as well start with something that we know. And with that, we need the pressure on these individuals. We need the pressure for 100 days. If you tell me there's a problem, we could solve it in the next couple years, let's call it global warming. Am I going to donate to that cause? I don't know. I don't really see a need. Just like your school project. You're not going to do it until you actually have a need to do it. What we want to do with this 100 days is we want to force people to feel that pressure, force individuals and corporations to donate money and come up with programs that the people that really need these programs, they'll have some kind of alternative to go to. I'm not heartless. I'm not saying these people don't need things. What I'm saying is if we want the general public and the corporations to actually open their wallets, we cannot give them more than 100 days.
I think that if you are under the impression that American corporations are going to completely fill the gap left by almost all social welfare programs within 100 days, you are living in a dream world. I can't imagine anything moving that fast of this size. Again, what if I have no hands and feet? Is the expectation, again, blamelessly impoverished? Is the expectation here then that Coca-Cola is going to come in with a program and fund it that's going to take care of me on day 99? Or am I going to have a little time here where I'm going to have to worry what I'm going to eat or how I'm going to get around or support myself?
Ideally, we'll have it, just like I said, a decentralized system, the community taking care of its own. And with the community taking care of its own, you know who the people that are disabled are. I volunteer for Seacoast Crime Stoppers, which is a great organization. And through all the PDs and the police chiefs and everything that I talk to, they talk to me about all the, the old people that don't have family that can come and check on them. And they go and they do door knocks for them. There are programs, there are community members and individuals, whether they're, it's the police, the fire department, or just private organizations like Crime Stoppers that go out and try to make the community a better and safer place.
But what's the basis for your belief that that could be so quickly nationalized? Again, within the space of a quarter.
I don't want it nationalized. That's
Well, I don't mean nationalized as in federal. I mean as in across the country. This could take place. Not just every little town does what it can, but this is going to be something that has to completely replace the safety net coast to coast.
We'll go to Katrina.
Sure.
We'll go to
FEMA.
Yeah, well,
Federal.
but not federal. I'm talking about the individuals that donated. We'll talk about pulling out of Afghanistan and getting our people out of Afghanistan. How Glenn Beck raised $30 million in 3 days. People are willing to open up their wallets for the right cause. If they feel like there's truly a need, they will open up their wallet and they will give. But if you said, hey, maybe we'll pull out of Afghanistan in a year and maybe there's going to be some problems with that withdrawal, do you think you would have raised $30 million to get people out of there? Absolutely not. Only because people felt a pressure, a dire need to get something done, did they not only come up with a nonprofit, but the nonprofit came up with a plan, a strategy, and how to implement it with the pilots, the planes, and everything that they needed, and raised that $30 million in a course of 3 days. There's no way that that would have happened if you had more time.
And you think that that money will be effectively marshaled immediately to the people who need it, and it could be done on a larger scale in this case?
I think that it could be effectively done if it's done on a local basis. If, for instance, you go over that 100 days and you have Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Google, Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, all pool all of their money into a mega nonprofit corporation that doles it all out, I think that will fail. And that's what I'm trying to prevent with that 100 days. Because if you give those companies more than 100 days, they will organize and they will say, we will be the new government. You see them trying to be the new government already. We do not want them to be the new government. The only way to prevent them from being the new government is to have scrappy people, scrappy entrepreneurs come up with companies and say, this is how we're going to do it. This is the one for Portsmouth, this is the one for New Hampshire, this is the one for Massachusetts, this is the one for Vermont. Each one is going to be able to raise money. And I think through those syndication sites like the GoFundMe's and like the Charity Navigator, those organizations, those search engines, that's how the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, the Amazons of the world will actually help. They'll drive traffic to those smaller, decentralized people that are actually allocating the money in a more efficient way.
Well, I'm not denying, just my final point, people's altruism. I'm not denying that exists. Again, my question more is about how this is so quickly going to be able to put out. And to me, it seems very sloppy and very pie in the sky to imagine that in 100 days, these private corporations with no leadership are going to be able to cobble together an entire replacement for the American social welfare system, which has existed for 50, 60 years and is enormous.
So, that he brings up a very valid point. How are you going to start a company and lead it within 100 days? We're opening up a 1.18, let's call it $1.2 trillion industry. If you do not believe that there are hungry, ambitious entrepreneurs, myself included, that want to go out and start these companies and help all of these people with this new $1.2 trillion that could be put into this kind of avenue, this market, this vertical, you're crazy. Everyone is going to jump at the opportunity to help save the world, to be a great human being, and run a company that is worth billions of dollars.
You can't get a bank loan in 100 days.
I can get a bank loan. I can get a bank loan in 3 days.
You must have exceptional credit.
I'm a realtor.
That's why. Yes. That's right, real estate. Yeah.
Yeah. You
might.
Before we just keep going back, I just want to get to some.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Questions.
But
so I just want to ask Scott.
You can raise money in 3 days.
I just want to ask Scott. So, Scott, do you think there are any other programs that should prime the pump, so to say, before we try to do this? So, for example, ending the war on drugs.
Yep.
Something like that. Are there any other programs that we should try to end or change first that will at least alleviate some of the problems that are
before this,
that make your 100 days seem more of a feasible program to Derek, or some people that might think it's too soon? Because there's people that are impoverished directly from government programs,
So
like the war on drugs
it's out of the scope of the debate topic, but I'm happy to answer the question anyway. I think, the war on drugs is an example. When you look at the dollars and cents for the wars on drugs, it's not going to help us save a lot of money. Could it help us save lives? For sure. I've had literally more friends than I can count die from opiate overdose. And it's definitely something that we need to address as a community. And I think that's really done through education. And I say that every time, but then I go to another funeral, I'm like, dude, you just saw, Ray died like 2 months ago, how are you doing this? So I don't know what the answer is, but I can say that dollars and cents wise, that's not the correct piece to look at. I think the most effective change that we could make to help make the transition possible would be the reform of the healthcare system. And the reform of the healthcare system really comes down to taxes and a revamp of the tax system. Because hospitals are, selling these $80 aspirin, not because they're assholes and they want to charge $80 for an aspirin, it's because when they give it away, that's a write-off of $80, and that's helping them maintain their nonprofit status. And if we have a reform of the tax code and we implement, let's say, a flat tax, which I'm guessing a lot of people in this room would be in favor of, that a 0% flat tax would be great. Just FYI, when you guys actually do the math, and if you did a flat tax and you eliminate Social Security, all healthcare programs, welfare programs, all we would need to run this country with the giant military that we have, which, let's just say hypothetically we keep it, and
So we're keeping that one? Yeah.
but let's just say we do. Let's just say hypothetically.
Footnote. Yeah.
We keep that one, and we increase education and R&D and science and all of those funding. We increase all of those. We would still be only at a 1.3% flat tax for the country. Happy to show you guys the math on that. But we could easily do it with a gross flat tax. But the key is reforming the healthcare, and if we can get everyone off of this crazy convoluted, middleman system where they're the insurance company's trying to screw the hospital is trying to, stay in government guidelines, and the tiny guy like us is getting screwed the whole time. If we can take that system and revamp it and go back to the McDonald's, hey, heart transplants $30,000, leg transplant, $10,000. If you can McDonald's-ize that system, and you can have competition within the healthcare system and competition within healthcare providers, like they're doing with the Oklahoma, what's the name of that program that they're doing?
Keith Smith's program in Oklahoma.
Yeah, what's that one called? The Free Medical Market Association?
Well, no, that's like an organization, but his particular, I think it's just called Oklahoma Surgical Center.
Yeah, the Oklahoma Surgical Center. If we could take that model and implement that across the country, that's the first step. And if we can reform the healthcare system, like the welfare system, that's easy, that's cake, because healthcare is the most cost, not restrictive, the most burdensome to the taxpayer. And if we could do that one first and show them that it's possible, the rest are easy.
So, okay, you did say it was outside the scope of the resolution, but you are saying that there should be steps taken before we try to just end all the welfare programs. That would at least
Not necessarily.
make the chaos and the threats of violence that is going to lead to my next question for
Yeah.
Derek.
Sure.
So, Derek, we're already being
Dexter, by the way, but everyone
Dexter.
calls me Derek. It's
Dexter, I don't know.
I was a novice in a monastery once, and my door said Derek for like the whole year. Yeah.
So we're being stolen from through taxation all the time,
Yeah.
and that's a violation of the non-aggression principle. But your argument was we should also be aware of the threat of violence if we end these programs that are funded by our violations. How can you justify allowing ourselves to be stolen from through taxation, and then we have to worry about the violence from the people that are benefiting from our stolen taxation?
Monetary goods.
Yeah. Like,
So the question then is, how do you balance the dangers that I suggest are there against the impingement on liberty that occurs when you make someone else pay for someone else's welfare, right? Okay, well, as far as justifying my expectation that there would be civil unrest resulting from this policy, I think you need only to look with your eyes to see exactly what that would look like. It's happening across the West Coast and the Midwest and is creeping over here. We see exactly what that type of violent reaction looks like for things that, compared to the elimination of the entire social welfare system, are almost rather minor. So indeed, I think that there is a lot of very real and immediate, as in it's happened in the past months and years, evidence for what the reaction would be. Again, and if you don't think that the proponents of this policy will be called racist for supporting the policy, they absolutely will be. The policy will be called racist. And to think that that could avoid civil unrest on that ground alone, let alone the broader argument, is crazy. Of course there will be. But yes, you're right, you have to balance that against the threat to liberty. And that's why I don't agree that we should keep these programs around forever. My point is simply that 100 days will stoke that unrest so much that it will become destructive, potentially terminally destructive to the country. So no, I don't support keeping these programs around indefinitely. They are an impingement on liberty. It's just the question of 100 days that can't be couched with that. We need a longer time.
So to tie it into my question I gave Scott, if we were to end the war on drugs, reform the healthcare system, allow these communities that are underprivileged and are recipients of large amounts of these welfare programs, if we allow them to start recovering and thriving on their own, do you then think the 100 days to end those systems would lead to less violence?
Yes, certainly it would be more of an acceptable transition, I would say. Still, on a practical basis, I don't think 100 days is workable. But yeah, certainly if this were part of a broader policy, because again, that's what the resolution here presupposes, is that the government is ready to do this, and they're going to. So if there was a broader policy that wound down other programs, and sort of as I responded, wound down even the welfare programs piece by piece, and even based on categories of recipient, yeah, I think that would go a long way to reducing the risks. But again, from a practical standpoint, I still don't think 100. It might get us closer, but 100 is just not going to be able to work. I mean, they wouldn't be able to print the forms that quick. I mean, it's just not, it's not realistic.
Innovation.
Okay. I think Stephen might have had his hand up first. Stephen first.
Two questions. One's a little bit silly, but silly one, since most of the rioting happens in the summertime, what if we just make the 100 days start in the fall?
I like it.
That would work in my favor.
Suggestion for,
That would work in my favor.
That's less of a question, I guess. But
I think you
second
take
one,
it.
for either of you, we're talking about, if you're talking about rioting and that kind of pressure, you're talking about individual action in small organizations. How much pressure do you think there would be from corporations themselves? We've seen a lot of them, like an example could be around like the net neutrality, put up a huge fight over a totally nonsensical thing, and encourage people to get involved that way, or even going after like WikiLeaks or marijuana growers and stuff like that, and removing their ability to use credit cards. How much of that kind of corporate pressure against this to purposely cause this 100-day plan to fail do you think we might see?
Or sort of a Soros character as well, as someone getting involved, a single person with a lot of capital that they use to express. I think you bring up a really good point. While my main argument was focused sort of specifically on the more visceral responses that we'd see, homes and businesses destroyed, you're right, there's a lot more that could be happening on the corporate side as well, which is just as much, at least almost as much of a threat as that would be. So no, I do think that's a concern. I think it weighs in favor of my argument that 100 days will spark too many things that will be destructive to the country, including what you mentioned.
So I would say that with 100 days, you're definitely going to see unrest. You're going to see problems, But with that 100-day mark, you're going to force people to come up with solutions. Corporations and companies, both of them, corporations and individuals, both are going to bitch for 30 days. And then they're going to be like, so we got to actually figure something out here because we're not going to get paid in a little bit from now. And they're going to say, yeah, we need to actually do this. If you give them more than the 100-day mark, they're going to say, hey, guess what? We're going to start organizing some riots. Hey, guess what? Now we're going to stop doing payment processing for all of these senators and anyone that's ever donated to them. They have the ability to start thinking about strategies how to undo what they don't like. By limiting it to that 100-day mark, you're forcing them in a box, and that box says, doors closed. No more questions. This is how it is. Over that 100-day mark, you're giving people a little bit, that leash is too long. And when the leash is too long, it's going to break, and the program's never going to be ended, and they may even get more money.
You seem concerned, question for Dexter. You seem concerned that the infrastructure isn't there in order to be able to support all the individuals and all the individual causes, whether it's disability or child homelessness. But there are 1.54 million charitable organizations in the United States, and they're probably not getting as much funding as they would, because everyone just kind of assumes the federal government will take care of it. So don't you think it would be why do you think the millions of charitable organizations would be able to fill the role, and do you think it is, do you think, I'm sure a lot of people fall through the cracks through not going through these decentralized charitable organizations that already exist.
Well, it's not a question of whether or not I think these charitable organizations could ultimately fill the role or fill the gap that would be left by our rescission of the welfare program. It's the 100 days question. I don't think that they can rally themselves in 100 days to completely fill that void for everyone who needs it. I mean, people fall through the cracks in the system now. There are 13 million people who are below the poverty line who don't receive any welfare services, so it's not like people aren't falling through the cracks in this system. But I imagine those cracks will get a lot wider within 100 days, again, one fiscal quarter. These major companies and nonprofits trying to get together to completely satisfy this role. It's really the 100 days that's my objection. I think ultimately they could fill the role, just not in that timeline.
Yeah, Dennis?
So, I mean, for me, the benefit of ending the welfare system is making community around community service.
Sure.
Right? So what we have is what we need is somehow energizing the community to get out and create, the church organizations and the women's organizations and the men's organizations and we start having people help people.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I guess I've heard both of you guys, I mean, and I don't know if it's just my imagination or what, but I hear both of you guys talking about big solutions, corporations, or, the welfare blob. Asking the welfare blob to win this down, I mean, it's just not going to happen. The welfare blob is a welfare blob, and it expands. It doesn't know how to do it. So my question is, to you, how do you motivate and tell people, the people within 100 days? How do you say churches, get out there, men start going with your neighbors and talk about who are the people in our neighborhood that need help. Right? The women's organization, how do you actually energize that level of thing within 100 days? And for you, are you really thinking that somehow that this blob is going to get over to community? I mean, I think these are two really separate entities. And how do you, 1,000 days, how do you get these guys going and get rid of this blob? I mean, I don't know how you get rid of the blob. I mean, he's excising it, right?
Yeah.
Right? You're saying, oh no, we need to somehow bring it down. But how? Yeah, I don't think it brings itself down.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Ralph.
So, to start with, I do not think a giant corporation is going to solve this problem. Well, I hopefully said that at least 4 or 5 times through this debate. Decentralization is going to be the key. City-based, maybe state, right? That's how we want to start. If we can make it smaller, that would be better. Having those small entities, the men's groups, the churches, be able to identify the people within their community that need the help, that's where we're going to be able to affect the best change. And if we want all of these programs to truly work, they need to be as small as physically possible. The blob system is not working, it's failing. We need them to be as small as possible. And in order for them to be as small as possible, we need to apply the most amount of pressure as we possibly can without killing people. And that's that 100-day mark.
Well, I guess, I don't suppose that the 100-day mark would prevent people from being killed, which I guess is the core of my argument. But so I guess the question then, Dennis, is what you had asked me: how could I expect the sort of blob of the welfare state to be wound down over a gradual period of time rather than having it all yanked out at once, right?
Well, how are you shifting it over to the community? I mean, okay, so it's 102 days, right?
Yeah.
What
For
is
the
it
sake of argument, yes. I'm not conceding that to the record. Yeah. Well, no. Again, we come back to the thing that we all agree on here, I think, which is that these things do need to be wound down completely. So I'm not saying that they need to be kept alive in some half-life that exists forever after this. No, they need to be sunsetted, wound down. It's just the objection to the period of time. And again, my broad proposal for how that would be appropriately done is maybe a little more divided than this very clean. Again, it sounds good. It's a great idea. Cut it all out at once. But I don't understand why it would be impossible if we're saying that could be done. Why we couldn't say, well, SNAP should be scaled down over the course of a year and a half because for these recipients, and then TAANF for others over appropriate period of time. Yeah, we have to work out what those times were. I don't see why that's impossible, but 100 days is.
Well, it's the same kind of statement as, I don't see why they couldn't just, be wound down over years, and then those years...
that is in fact what I'm saying.
But that's the exact same thing as saying, a couple of years later, might as well just keep...
We are operating in a universe here, which is the supposition of this whole debate, again, that the Congress and the President are there, they are behind this program of winding down welfare. So we have the political will there. I'm not saying we should just throw darts at a board and we can kind of guess vaguely at dates. No, set a policy that has dates and specific programs to wind down each welfare program for each class of individuals, if that's appropriate. I'm not saying that we should do it vaguely. No, there should be a policy that sets dates. I'm just saying that setting them all at 100 is the wrong way to do it. No, we shouldn't leave it open-ended. I'm not suggesting that.
To your original, one of your original points, the 40 million people that we would piss off by eliminating
That's only
these programs.
SNAP.
The program would need to be eliminated at the start of a new presidential term. Because 2 years later, we're electing House reps again, and those 40 million people are going to be pissed off. If we did this, 1 year out from an election cycle or less, I'm sorry, Republicans are not going to win. The program would be overturned immediately. That's the other point of that 100-day process. You elect a new president, you have a new Congress, you have a new Senate, and everyone's on the same page. We're rolling this program out, we have that 100 days, we kill it, we say, hey, everything is all done. Now, you at least have another 300 days for the rest of the year, plus a whole nother year to go through and have people's emotions settle down. If their emotions are still raving high because they're super pissed off because we took all their free money, then they're going to just vote us out and overturn the entire idea that we just said, hey, this is what we want to do. And the programs would be back in place and we would never have any change.
But if my house is on fire and the grocery store is closed, I don't really care about the midterms.
Well, if your house is on fire, you have insurance, and the grocery store is closed, then there's an entrepreneur that should start another one.
I feel the real estate coming out again, yeah. You want to find me the new house?
Mm-hmm.
We have a question, Aaron.
Yeah, so I totally agree that the infrastructure is already there, so there are already people that know how to integrate these programs, not necessarily based on funding. the people that are already working in communities know that funding is never permanent. They're always applying for more grants. They never know what's going to come next, and they're always asked by either private or public funding where their self-reliance is going to come from. And it's anticipated that they eventually figure out how to make money, but they never do because there's no incentive to do so. And in marketing, you know that messaging is super important. So I think if there were a way to flip the script to, you have to get this done in 100 days, here's pressure, to we can't harm the taxpayers any longer, we have to help everybody. Everybody needs to band together and do what's right for their community, like Dennis said. So I think messaging maybe has to be a big part of it, but what do you guys see as the incentive structure to get either of your ideals done? Because if the people that are against it, but still have to work within it, aren't incentivized to do so, there will, yes, there'll be violence and there'll be riots, but there has to be either a financial or some sort of emotional incentive to do what needs to be done to reach the ultimate goal. I wonder what you guys think that should be.
The only thing that I could think that would have as a, that financial incentive is showing people that, well, this last year it was over 20%, but in normal years, it's, let's call it 10% of what you would pay in federal taxes goes away. So you would be getting that back directly, not being collected. Obviously, I'd like to eliminate more of that, but that's a different debate.
Well, and I would say that if messaging is the only driver, at least to address people's strong reaction, and then also to get private organizations to voluntarily come into this, it's going to have to be some really strong messaging. Because among the people in this country and among the corporations and organizations in this country, there is a big diversity, obviously, of viewpoints. And to overcome that on such a substantial point, again, the messaging would have to be strong. As to why this would need to happen, I think I almost fall a little bit over to Scott's argument, which is that ultimately, again, not for me within 100 days, but when these policies are wound down at a fixed date certain, again, not within 100 days, but when that happens, people will be forced to take action. And that is, I would say, the final incentive is they either need to step in and do this, or no one will, if the proposal is that government should completely remove itself from welfare. Which again was why it falls back to my original point, where we all want the same thing here. I just don't think that it's practical in this period of time to expect organizations, private organizations, to voluntarily sort of confederate or get involved, in such a scale as that they would completely replace the welfare system. I don't think that's possible in that period of time, even if all the intentions are there and the messaging is fantastic and even manages to align people of differing political views. I still don't think that alone would be strong enough it's to achieve in that period of time. It needs more.
So, final 10 point to your question, it was an incentive-based question, right? What's the incentive? I think when you talked about messaging in the beginning, that first 30 days is going to be very important, and showing people case studies where a private individual, like the guy that owns 5 Hour Energy, has taken a small amount of capital and completely changed an entire country with that capital. And showing people that innovation is actually the key to successful implementation of any project, any program. And if we have that kind of messaging that shows people innovation is the key to success, then we don't really have to worry about coming up with exactly what's going to happen. Those people that isn't going to be me. Someone is going to come up with an innovative solution, and it is going to help everybody. And that's the key, showing people past success and saying that's going to be the key to success in the future.
Sorry, just a quick programming note. I just got a notification that my Uber that was scheduled is going to be here in like 10 minutes. I tried to change it, but it won't let me change it.
You live in Dover, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we can just drive.
Yeah, I'd say I'll give you a ride home.
Are you sure? Because I can cancel it then.
Yeah, I'll give you a ride.
Cancel it then. I didn't know anyone here yet, so.
I drive literally right through Dover.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I live 10 minutes from here.
Long as you concede the debate, sir.
Yes, the bribery comes full circle now, yeah.
That $100 will be a payment still.
We have another question.
Oh, there we go, that's enough.
He had alluded to the fact that you've excluded Medicare and Social Security. A, is that true? And B, why?
So,
So that was my fault. I think, I wanted to limit, because they said all, and it's just like, well, what, you could just go ad infinitum. And I suggested that they just kind of constrain it.
Yeah.
So that was my fault, and I apologize.
Oh, no,
I'll expand just a touch on that, like I would in the real world.
Right.
So for me, Medicare and Social Security would be left out of that 100-day program, because there are people that have been paying into those programs for their entire life, and they use them.
Yeah, well,
I'm not saying it's a good idea, but they're using Social Security as their retirement plan. I think that is a terrible idea, and if you guys want investment advice, do not do that. It is a terrible, take all of your money and throw it in the S&P 500 index. It's going to do far better for you. That's why that one's left out, because those people that have been 60 years paying into a system, if we ended it, they would need some kind of payment to get out of that system, and we don't have the capital as a government to make those payments. And unfortunately, I think it would take about 50 years for us to bleed everyone out. What I would recommend is people under the age of 18, or even if you say under the age of 6, you guys are no longer going to get Medicare and Social Security. Deal with it. Then figure out a way to do it. And that next generation will be fine. But the generations that have paid into it, especially people 65 and older, are going to have a big problem with it. Even 50, I'd say even 50 and older.
I forget the details. I think Ron Paul had something like where above a certain age you get a lump sum, here's your money back, and the younger people, the deal is we take this monkey off your back.
Yeah. I love Ron Paul.
Listened to him 15 years ago.
Yeah, I love Ron Paul in a lot of sense. Some of the things that Ron Paul, for me, he misses the point on is the financial implications of some of the policies that he recommends. And if we're paying out a lump sum to those people, where does that money come from? What interest rate are we paying on it? And that is a direct tax on the people that we have to come up with immediately. So we have to be very careful with how we think about that. And that's why I think doing it at the lowest age possible, where we don't have to pay that lump sum, and then just the entire generation comes along, is going to be the best solution, because we don't have that out-of-pocket money up front to pay off those people that are currently in the system.
On the couch.
This whole debate presupposes that our economic house of cards is standing. And yet, inflation in November was 6.2%, and the latest producer price index is 9.9%. I think we're looking at over 10% inflation next year, maybe even worse. And that's going to crash this economy so bad that you're going to have social programs completely ballooning. That's going to force, it seems to me, the government to do something about it.
So we've already seen
it's going to be 100 days.
Well, we've already seen that. The biggest so I trying to pull government data. Everyone is terrible. If you guys haven't tried it, go home and try it. Go to I think it's usbudget.gov or something like that, like usabudget.gov. It's terrible to try to pull information from them. But if you look at 2019 before the pandemic, welfare spending, they call it income security. That's how it's labeled. But they don't put Medicaid in that, which is very interesting to me. It's 8.9%. It was the 5th biggest item, I believe. In 2020, it went up to like 19%. 22, 19.8%. And it was the #1 item now. It beats out every other item on our budget because of all of those, the free money loans that we did that, people got to take advantage of. Some people really needed those, but Barstool Sports proved that the community's there for those that actually need it. And when you have people like Dave over at Barstool that are saying, hey, let's raise money for the bar that everybody loves that's going out of business because the government said you can't work, which is something the government shouldn't have said to begin with, people are there to support the things that they truly believe in. But getting that spending down is going to be key.
Another question. If this 100 days also had presupposed a transition from a handout program structure to a hand-up program structure, does that, it doesn't?
No. They tried to hand up messaging since, what, the 70s? Before I was alive. Yeah, they've been trying that forever. It's proven it doesn't work.
Trying hard enough.
It doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We have proof that it doesn't work. So,
But doesn't work fair sound so
Yeah.
nice though?
yeah, it sounds great, but it has never actually worked. What we need is
Decentralization.
we need decentralization. It's not that we don't need the safety net. We need pressure on people. And with decentralization comes going to your pastor at church and saying, hey dude, I'm in a rough spot. I just lost my job. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to pay for my bills. In that conversation, you're going to be okay. But if you're just like, I just don't feel like working anymore and let me go get some government money, that's not going to fly anymore. And only with decentralization, when you have to have that face-to-face intimate conversation, that's the only way that we're going to take out all of those inefficiencies. And the only way to have that decentralization be possible is for people on the ground to know who those people are that are in need. And if you have mega corporations running this, they're not going to know who their people are. I just refinanced my loans with like Everest or something for student loans. They don't know who I am. I'm just a number with budgets on the screen, and I make okay money, and I have an okay credit score. Yep, we refinance you. And that's how all the national players would work. That's why the key is that decentralization, that you going to your pastor, going to your family, going to your cousin, going to the community and saying, hey, I need help. And only with that pressure of 100 days are you forcing people to make that uncomfortable conversation happen. It's not a comfortable conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to happen. And if you're not willing to make that conversation, then you really don't need that money.
Well, from that answer rather, I'm just wondering then, is your proposal for this 100-day wind-down program then that it's completely unmanaged? We just set a deadline and turn the tap off when that deadline comes? There's going to be no management of the people who are current recipients of the welfare programs to try to direct them to the right place where they could receive private aid through these voluntary programs. Because I'm just trying to clarify from what you said, it sounds like you are almost advocating a totally unmanaged removal of the welfare system.
I would say a mostly unmanaged removal of the system, and the key being mostly. Where the government can help is one way and one way only, in my opinion. And that's directing people to organizations that can't help. And I think that the way that the government can do that is partner with people like Google, people like the GoFundMe, or you name the charity search index, right? Having those people partner with the government to say, hey, I can help identify charities for those people in need.
It's not really decentralized then, though, is it? It's a public-private partnership.
No, it's 100% decentralized, 100% private. The government just not saying, hey, I'm going to throw my hands up in the air, fuck all you guys, I don't care about you. It's, hey, this is the program, it's going to end. By the way, these are the people that we heard that are going to help everybody that wants help.
Well,
Yes.
Let's just go to Brian, and then we'll play with Eric.
All right, I did have a question, right? I had two questions. I
did it.
But because the point Scott just raised. So, the 100 days deadline doesn't account for things like legislative process from the introduction of a bill all the way to the passing of the bill.
The passing starts after it's passed, that's day one.
Right, I understand that point. The 100 days is designed to blindside major corporations to prevent them from getting a foothold and taking on this upon themselves. You want a hodgepodge of national nonprofits to take over, assuming that, well, everyone found out about it from day one, you have 100 days, so they can't get that in there. But what about all the greasy palms before the passing of it, when, you know, corporations get into lobbying, and then what you just said, or we were talking about, actually I don't remember what it was, but
No, that's a good point.
once they start getting in the halls of Congress and start to undecentralize and get all the information, because you're saying, you know, government, the one purpose they would have in this endeavor is to direct people to the right sources. So that's where, if they were able to get in a lobby, they could direct all the resources to themselves.
You know, that's for this particular debate, that's where this debate really turns into a fairy tale. In reality, the second that someone proposes ending all welfare in 100 days, it's not going to happen. I don't have faith that it will happen. And unless you can start that messaging in those back rooms, and you can start and get buy-in from those billionaires and from the companies, and you use their ego and say, hey, do you think you can do it better than we do? I know for a fact every single one of them, 100% of them, are going to say, I can do it better than you, I can do it better than you, just give me the money. All of them are going to buy in. And the only way that this will ever pass is if you have buy-in from all of those people, all of those corporations, all of the dark shadows in the back, all of the lobbyists, because they want their piece of that $1.2 trillion. And if you get that, if you get their buy-in, because they say, I can do it better than the government, then it's the only way that will pass. Because the second that you have a bill that goes one way or another, and let's call this a far-right bill because we know the lefties ain't going to vote for it, you're going to have pushback the whole time. Look at the Build Back Better, right? Like, we've had a huge amount of pushback for this the whole time that it's even been a thing. So we really need to, work on that messaging part and get buy-in from corporations in the beginning, from the lobbyists in the beginning.
But again,
that turns it into not a fairy tale.
Dexter?
sure.
So in your opening statement, you mentioned that given 100 days to a wind down, why would any government employee continue the effort towards the end of their ultimate destruction? Why would they not just quit? So given that you both agree that we should end these things at some point, would that not do more to end the programs than a
Oh, you mean encouraging encouraging their dissatisfaction with their jobs to end it quicker? Yeah, you're right. If they hate it the first week of the 100 days, they might be out in a week. Yeah, then we'll be done. Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think is that what you mean?
Well, I mean, to the end of my question, which I was almost there, would that not do more to end them than to set a deadline that's not quite as concrete, that's also at the mercy of change of administrations in order to backtrack the eventual end of it? If you're going to quit in 100 days,
It's the thing is, it's kind of a good thought experiment almost, yeah. I wouldn't say that it would do more to create problems. I think if there was a longer timeline that people knew what they were engaged in versus this 100-day thing, there's a chance that we would have more effective administration of the wind down. Again, my point in making that argument is that not only is this a bad policy because of the reaction, because of how it may harm people who are actually in need of it, who can't prepare in 100 days, but also that it's not going to be effectively administered because these people are going to have absolutely no ambition or interest in working on it. I think if we extend the timeline out, we can mitigate that. So in fact, I think a longer timeline addresses that. Again, not universally, it's still disheartening, I'm sure, to be working for an organization which you're closing, be that over the course of 6 months or 3 or 2 years. But I do think the longer that we stretch that timeline, not that I'm encouraging infinite, it mitigates that problem more. The shorter the timeline is, I think the more likely we're going to have sloppy implementation of whatever wind down we have, because we're not going to have effective administrators.
We don't have an effective administration.
Well, God knows that. Yeah. Let me establish a fact at the bar of the status quo. We'll call effective. We'll put quotes around it. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Let's wrap up the Q&A now, and then the discussion post-debate will go on for a while.
Yeah. So conclusion.
Yeah. So we will start with Scott with his closing arguments.
Okay.
You have 7 minutes.
7? Wow. Forgot it was 7.
Yeah, I did too.
So, closing arguments. You guys have heard the story of Goldilocks, right? My porridge is too cold. My porridge is too hot. 100 days is the perfect amount. If it's 10 days, you will see everything that Dexter talked about. It will be chaos. It will not work. If you go over that, it will be overturned. Or if it will be implemented, it will be implemented in a way that doesn't foster decentralization, which is the key to success. 100 days is that Goldilocks zone. We don't want to see people die. We don't want to see this overturned in the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court. I don't think the Supreme Court would have grounds to overturn it, because welfare is not constitutional. You read the Constitution. Welfare is not in there.
Damn straight.
But it could be overturned in the House and the Senate, especially with the social media pressure, with the corporate pressure, with every single pressure that you could possibly think of. There is that possibility of people getting rattled and politicians being politicians and saying, well, I want to get my votes and there's 40 million people that don't like me. We need to eliminate that threat. And to do that, we need to have people focus on innovation and focus on problem solving. And giving people too much time, just like a school project with our CFI notebooks, if you give people so much time, they're not going to do it. They're going to wait till the end and then maybe do something. But the whole time up to that, they're just going to bitch and bitch and bitch and bitch and bitch, and nothing's going to get done. We don't want that. We want solutions. We want as many innovative ideas as we can possibly imagine. And with the amount of talent, time, and money that exist in the private sector right now, plus the $1.2 trillion that we're going to inflow into a potential system, there is incentive. People are motivated to create these companies, to create solutions that actually work. People bitch all the time about how, the system doesn't work, the school system's terrible, and some of the worst school systems in the country have more money per capita, per student, than any other school system in the country, because they're run poorly. You need private sector people. You need competition. When you have competition, you will breed success. But without competition, you're just going to get crap. That's all you're going to get. And that's the key with 100 days, is you're going to have a bunch of very motivated people trying to get that piece of pie. And when they're motivated, they're going to come up with great solutions. They're going to compete against each other. And with competition, you get the best possible solution. We want to see companies put the money where their mouth is, right? Ben & Jerry's, I stopped buying because just look at their Twitter feed, and you will stop buying Ben & Jerry's as well. We want all of these companies to stop with the blah, 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 blah. We want them to actually say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to donate $100 million to ABC. We're going to give $1 million to every state, right? We need to see them actually do something. And in order for them to actually do something, they need people. They need those innovative companies to start implementing these programs, these new programs, these transition programs. I'll end with these two things, kind of a bonus round. We talked about it a little bit. If at the same time we implemented a flat tax, it would be the perfect time to implement a flat tax. Because if we're lowering the budget by 10%, and you don't see a 10% reduction in your tax bill, you're going to be pissed, right? How do we fix that? Flat tax. Everyone pays the same amount. If there's a 10% reduction, you see a 10% reduction. That's what we want. We want people to be motivated. When they say, hey, cutting all of these corporate spending programs is only going to help all these rich people, and it's going to impoverish us even more, no one's going to like that. And it's going to give us that footstool that we need to advocate for that flat tax. And people will buy in because they're like, oh, how much? 9%? Oh, wait, you can make it as low as 1.3%? I'm in. Every single person in the world will say, I'm in for a 1.3% tax, compared to the 50% the government's ripping out of my pocket right now. Unemployment's going to fall to the lowest in history. People are going to be motivated to go get jobs. Day 100 comes, people are going to be like, all right, I'm not going to go riot. I actually need to go make money because I don't have money to do whatever I want to do, whatever that may be. They're going to need to actually go out and say, hey, I'm here. I'm ready. I'm here to sign up for a job. Home Depot, sign me up. I'll push carts. I'll do whatever you need me to do. People will do whatever they need to do to survive. It's human nature. If we want to save another $550 million, we could also kill OSHA at the same time. Just a thought. And I'll end with this quote. I'm going to give you guys the paraphrased version and not the actual one, because the way that Jefferson spoke isn't the same it is today. Democracy will cease to exist when you take away from those who are willing to work and give to those who would not.
Well, I have little, I think, at this point, I need to say. The question really provided, or questions provided for a good, lively debate where I think we could expound on a lot of the points that needed to be covered. But let me summarize. As I observed at the outset of my initial argument, Mr. Forte and I are in agreement on the overarching question. Ought social welfare spending to be largely terminated? Of course it must be, if the massive scope of government is ever to be curbed. The debate consists then exclusively in the means of implementation, and therefore the question before the House this evening is whether or not the proposed 100-day timeline will incur the dangers that I discussed. Namely, the moral dangers associated with causing those blamelessly impoverished or disabled to undergo an almost immediate change of circumstance, and the practical danger of a violent and potentially terminal outcry against the policy. Mr. Forte argues that they won't riot on the 101st day because they'll need jobs. That does not seem to be the case at present. I do earnestly hope that the circumstances which are contemplated by this resolution do come to pass, and that the seats of federal power soon determine that these programs must be eliminated, as they must be. But if it should happen, I also hope that those in the majority will exercise reason and reject the proposal that it should occur within 100 days. There was an argument that was made. Well, I'll leave that. Anyway, I would likewise ask that you, ladies and gentlemen, then join me in voting against this evening's resolution. Thank you. I'll save my side remark for later time. Yeah, yes, that was an excellent exercise in self-restraint.
Good debate, sir.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was fun.
Thank you, guys. It's good. Thank you a lot. Thank you. It's good.
Are we recording?
Yeah. Hopefully.
Dexter, good debate, sir.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Had a lot of fun doing it.
Thanks a lot.
Frank, thank you so much for having us. And thank you, Shell.
Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot your name. Thank you, Shell, for
Derek, Dexter.
Thank you
All
very
the
much
time,
for
yeah.
you. Fantastic.
So the post-debate results are in, and with an increase of 14.3%, the winner is Scott. It was one vote.
Congratulations.
The final was 71.4% agree. The one disagree remained, so you flipped one undecided.
All right. Yes.
Small group. Most people on.
None of you are getting bribes.